Today's Tanya, the Tanya for the 24th day of Nissan, Chabad Nissan, is in the beginning of Perek Mem Beis. In the earlier Perek, the Alter Rebbe explained how even in the doing of positive mitzvahs, it is necessary to have a certain element of fear, a certain amount of yira, and love itself is not sufficient. With ava alone, it is not called avedas eved. With yira, then the mitzvah becomes avedas eved. And the difference between avedas ben and avedas eved is that the aveda of the ben, of the child, is with love, generally. And love means that your mitzias, your existence, your personality, your being is close to your father, similar to the father, longs for the father, cleaves to your father. And the same is true with the Jew and the Eibishter, that the love that a Jew has for God, that produces a longing and a desire to bring my existence, my being, my reality closer to God's reality. In Yira, with fear, it's not the desire to bring my reality or my existence closer to God, but rather the effect that fear has is that it wipes out my existence and my reality completely, and the result is that only God and His will are real, and He is the boss, and I do what He says because He says so, and there's no thought of self at all. And that's what makes it the Aveda of an Eved. That's what it's called, Aveda. Whereas with love, it says in Chassidus that serving God out of love can in some way be considered serving yourself, because your own existence is being enhanced, and that's what motivates, to some degree, the Ava. Now in Perek Mem Beis, the Rebbe is going to talk further about the nature of this fear. V'hinei b'ma shenemar li'il b'inyin yiratato, concerning what was said above about the lower level of fear, that when a person stops and thinks about the greatness of God and how God singles him out and identifies himself, God identifies himself with the individual Jew, and he stands over him and he observes him and he watches to see if he is serving God properly, this all brings about a lower level fear. So based on all of that, Yuvan Heitev, we will understand clearly Mashekosov beGemara, a statement in the Gemara that needs clarification. The Gemara says, al posuk, on the verse, V'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha she'el me'imach ki im li yiras Hashem Elokecha. The Torah says to the Eden, what does God want of you but to fear Him? So the Gemara asks, Otu yira milse zutra sehi. Is fear of God a simple thing? The pasuk is saying, what is God asking? He's asking only that you fear Him. So the Gemara says, and since when is fearing God a simple matter? And the Gemara answers, it is a simple matter, because legabe Moshe milse zutra sehi. For Moshe, to Moshe, fearing God was a simple matter. So the question of the Gemara was, we know that the natural impulse of a human being is to fear physical things. He is intimidated by physical intimidations. But to be afraid of God doesn't seem to be a natural thing. Certainly not an easy thing to come by. And the Gemara's answer is that to Moshe it's a simple thing. So this needs clarification. The Gemara's answer needs clarification. Because at first glance, the Gemara's answer is not understandable. The Torah says, what does God ask of you, of each and every individual Jew? The Torah is addressing the Jews and is saying to the Jews, God is asking very little of you, asking of you only that you fear Him. And then, and the answer of the Gemara is that legabe Moshe, it is a simple matter. But that doesn't answer the question at all. We know that to Moshe it's a simple matter. The question is, how can it be expected of every Jew? How could it be a simple matter to every Jew? So basically, the Alter Rebbe's explanation is going to be that when the Gemara says that for Moshe it's a simple matter, he means the Moshe within every one of us. As I'll explain. Elom ha'inyan hu. So the explanation is as follows. Ki kol nefesh v'nefesh mibeis Yisrael, because every single soul of Jews, yesh ba, has within it mebechinas Moshe Rabbeinu olav hasholem, some element of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki hu, because Moshe is one of the Shiva Re'im, one of the 7 shepherds of the people. We know that the 7 shepherds are Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. So Moshe is one of the 7 shepherds. And why are they called shepherds? Hamamshichim chayus ve'elikus l'klolos nishmas Yisrael, because they bring life and godliness to all Jewish souls. Shelochein, which is why they are called Nikroyim b'shem Royim. They are called shepherds. Just as a shepherd takes care of the needs of the sheep, he tends to the sheep and provides for them what they need. In the same way, the shepherds of the people bring to the people and they feed them that which they need. And here Hasidim say that in this line, where the Alter Rebbe writes that the 7 shepherds bring chayus ve'elikus to every Jewish soul, here the Alter Rebbe spent a number of weeks in deciding whether he should write chayus ve'elikus or chayus elikus. Chayus elikus would mean godly life. Chayus ve'elikus means life and godliness. And he decided to write it with the vav. As we learned earlier, that kavana, love and fear of God, that's what gives life to the mitzvah. That's what elevates the mitzvah. That's what gives it the ability to fly, to rise upwards. The elikus, the godliness of the mitzvah, is the act itself. Because in the act there is bittul. And that bittul is elikus. So it is the 7 shepherds who bring life and godliness to every Jew. Moshe Rabbeinu olav hasholem, and Moshe of the 7 shepherds, who klolus kulam, incorporates and embodies all of them. V'nikra raya mehemna, and he is called a special shepherd, a trusted shepherd. Hainu, which means shemamshich bechinas hadas l'klolus Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who brings das, the knowledge of God, to all Jews. Leida, that every Jew should be able to know. And as he will explain, that das means not merely information, but das means attachment and so on. Leida, to know, as Hashem, to know God. Kol echad kefi asogas nishmosei, to each person there is given the ability to know God depending on the capacity of his individual neshama to understand and comprehend godliness. In other words, the degree of his seichel. V'shar shalom ma'ila, and also based on the origin of the particular neshama above. V'yanikasa mishayrish nishmas Moshe Rabbeinu olav hasholem, and also within Moshe Rabbeinu there are souls that draw their das from a higher level within Moshe, or a greater level of Moshe's influence, and there are those who have a lower level of influence. So every neshama draws this das from the neshama of Moshe, and the neshama of Moshe is rooted in the divine das, in God's das, which means the das of Atzilus. In Atzilus there are all 10 attributes. So the das of Atzilus, that is the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the 10 attributes of Atzilus, they are completely one with God Himself. Shehu v'daitei echad, because God and His das are one, v'hu hamada, and as we learned earlier in Tanya, in the name of the Rambam, that with God, the knowledge, the knowing, and what is known are all one and the same. There's no separation within God, and He's not composed of parts. So the knowledge of God and what God knows is all the same thing. Therefore, being that every neshama is rooted in the neshama of Moshe, has an element of Moshe Rabbeinu within him, that's why the Gemara can say that fearing God is a simple matter for every Jew, because to Moshe it's a simple matter. Meaning to say that as a result of the element of Moshe within every Jew's neshama, that's why it is a simple matter for every Jew to have the fear of God, at least some level of fear. Another thing, which is even more than what we said before. Until now we're saying that the fear is available to every Jew because of some element in the neshama, coming from the neshama of Moshe to the neshama of every Jew. But what's more is that b'chol day v'day, in every generation, there come down elements of the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu, umislapshin beguf v'nefesh al chachmei hadei einei ha'eda. And these elements of Moshe's neshama are clothed in the body and soul of the chachamim of the generation, who are called the eyes of the community. The addition here is that the element of Moshe, as it expresses itself in the chachmei hadei, in the chachamim of each generation, is that it expresses itself not only in their soul. That we said already before, that in every Jewish neshama there's an element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama. But here he's saying that in every generation there is an element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama that comes down and clothes itself in the body and soul of the chachamim. And that's why when you look at a tzaddik, just as it was with Moshe Rabbeinu, you look at the physical body of the tzaddik and you see godliness. Which means that by looking at a rebbe, by looking at a tzaddik, your yirah shamayim becomes strengthened. You actually gain yirah shamayim from looking at the body of a tzaddik. And the rebbe adds a footnote here and says that the Alter Rebbe carefully puts guf before nefesh, that this element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama that comes down into the body of the chacham of the generation is in the body and soul rather than soul and body, to emphasize that it's not that because in the nefesh there is an element of Moshe Rabbeinu, it eventually expresses itself also in the body, but that in this case the body is independent, so to speak. The body on its own virtue, by its own right, expresses and embodies the element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama. So it's not through the nefesh of the tzaddik that his body expresses this godliness of Moshe Rabbeinu, the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's directly into the body itself. And we find that this was unique with Moshe Rabbeinu himself, that when he was born, before he became a Talmud Chacham, before he became a leader of the Jewish people, before he went up to Har Sinai and spoke face to face with God and so on and so forth, from the moment that he was born, the Torah says that the house in which he was born was filled with light. And as the Rebbe has pointed out, this was not an ordinary house. It was not a house that was otherwise dark. This was the house of Amram and Yocheved. Amram was the Nasi Hader at the time, and they already had Aaron and Miriam were already born to them. So this was a house that had great light in it to begin with. And yet, into such a house, the moment Moshe Rabbeinu was born, they could sense that the whole house was filled with a new light, a greater light. And that is why the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu is so significant, that it is what undermined the plan of Haman, where he thought that the 7th of Adar was a good time to harm the Jews, God forbid, because it was the Yartzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he didn't realize that the fact that it was also the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu turned it around and made it a special day for Jews. Because unlike other tzaddikim, whose virtue begins to be felt when they arrive at some level of greatness, when they begin to function as adults in great roles and so on. But the moment they're born, we don't know yet what this tzaddik is going to be. But with Moshe Rabbeinu, from the moment he was born, his birthday itself was a celebration for Jews. And just as this was true by Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the seventh from Avraham, which is why he was the one who brought godliness down to earth in building the Mishkan and so on. The same is true also of the Rebbe Zal Gesund Sein, that being the seventh, his birthday itself is celebrated as a Chassidische Yontiv, because he too, being the seventh, brings godliness down to earth and reveals Mashiach into this world. Back to the text. So in every generation, there is the element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama that comes down into the chachamim of the generation, lilamed das es ha'om, so that these chachamim of each generation, the tzaddik of each generation, can teach the people knowledge, v'lei dagdulas Hashem, that they should know the greatness of God, ula'avdei belev v'nefesh, so that they can serve Him with heart and soul. Ki aveda shebelev. What is the connection between knowing and serving with a whole heart? It's because the service of the heart, love and fear of God that a Jew has, he lefi hadas, is determined by the das. Based on the das that a person has in the greatness of God, that determines the degree of love and the degree of fear. Kamesha Kosuv, as it says, Da es Elikei avicha, know the God of your father, v'avdehu belev sholem v'nefesh chafetza, and serve Him with a whole heart and a desirous soul. So we see that it's from the knowledge of God that we come to the wholehearted service, so that it's the das that brings the heart. Concerning the future, when Mashiach comes, it says, V'le ish es re'ehu, le'medu es Hashem, ki kulam yedu esi, that in the future one will not say to another, come and know the knowledge of God, I will teach you, because everybody will know by themselves. So we won't be dependent for this das. We won't be dependent on another person, because it will be available to everybody. It will be available in abundance. But until Mashiach comes, we have access to this knowledge through the tzaddik of the generation, or the tzaddikim of the generation. So we have access to this knowledge of God, firstly, through the element of Moshe Rabbeinu that exists in the neshama of every Jew, and secondly, through the presence, the physical presence of the tzaddikim of the generation who embody an element of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama, which makes the learning of God's greatness much more available, much closer at hand. Ach iker hadas, but primarily this knowledge and this das of God's greatness that brings to a wholehearted service of God, eino hayediya levado, is not mere awareness or information, sheyedu gdulas Hashem epi seifrim epi svarim, to study and find out about the greatness of God from writers and from their works, elo ha'ikirhu, but primarily, essentially, this das is attained by ha-migdaite, by thinking deeply. Bigdulas Hashem, into the greatness of God, v'litkeya machshavte beHashem b'chezek ve'emetz halev v'hameach, and by attaching the mind strongly and deeply to the greatness of God with great effort and with great strength of heart and mind. Ad shetehei machshavte mikusheres b'Hashem b'kesher amitz v'chazak, until the mind becomes attached to God with a strong and deep bond. Kemei shehi mikusheres, to the same degree and in the same way that the mind is connected and attached, b'dover gashmi, to a physical thing, shereye be'enei basa, which he can see with his physical eye, umamik be'machshavte, and he dwells on the physical thing, and his mind is deeply engaged and attached to it. In the same way, he should become attached in his mind to the greatness of God, keneda, as is known, shed das uloshen hiskashus, that the word das, which means knowledge, but it implies more attachment of mind than mental activity itself. Kemei, as we find in the Torah, v'ha'odam yoda, that Adam knew Chava and they begat children. So yoda means not a mere academic knowledge, even a deep knowledge, but academic. It means an attachment of the mind to where that which you're studying and that which you're contemplating becomes intimately and immediately real. Just as a physical thing which we can see with our eye is real and tangible to the mind, in the same way, das in God means not that we have studied a lot and we've become geniuses in explaining God's greatness. What it means is that we've attached our mind so intimately and so personally to the greatness of God that God's greatness, godliness, has become to us, in our mind at any rate, tangible and real. And then there is a real connection. It becomes a personal thing. It's not merely an academic awareness, but it becomes my way of seeing the world, my way of thinking, my way of perceiving reality, and the reality is godliness. Therefore, when the mind is that deeply enmeshed in godliness, has sunk its teeth, so to speak, into godliness, and godliness has become real and tangible, that makes it possible for the heart to respond to this greatness of God, so that it is from das that love and fear of God are created. In today's Hayom Yom, for the 24th of Nissan, which is also the 9th day of the Eimer, the Rebbe writes concerning our Minhagim that it is our custom not to make a Shehecheyanu during the days of Svira. Then the Rebbe writes that in every one of us there is that which is not good. There's a certain amount of unholiness in every one of us. So we learn from the So'ir La'azozo, from the goat that was sent away into the wilderness on Yom Kippur, we see that So'ir La'azozo was an Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. And what we learn from that is that since every creature, every created being, has in him some amount of unholiness, some amount of evil, the solution to that is that we have to send it away into a desert, into an uninhabited place, so that it's destroyed and lost and doesn't affect people, doesn't affect the person in whom the evil originally existed.